There are silences that are simply the absence of sound, and then there are the silences that are living, breathing entities. They are heavy, viscous things, thick with unspoken words and agreed-upon lies. For 12 years, I have lived inside such a silence. My name is Kate Morrow, and I was a ghost in the house where I grew up, a smudged fingerprint on the gleaming portrait of the Morrow family. They didn't just ask me to leave. They performed a ritual of erasure, scrubbing my existence from the family narrative until no trace remained, until I became little more than a cautionary tale they told themselves about what happens to difficult daughters. The day the silence broke was a Tuesday. The envelope was nestled between a utility bill and a coupon mailer, an austere and elegant intruder in my mundane mailbox. It was heavy, cream-colored, and printed on stock so thick and expensive it felt like a promise and a threat all at once. My name, Kate Morrow, was scrawled across the front in a looping, familiar calligraphy that sent a jolt of ancient lightning down my spine. It was my mother's handwriting. Even after 12 years, I would know it anywhere. Her presence was in every curve of the ink, a cold, perfumed scent of gardenias and absolute control. My hands trembled as I tore it open, the sound obscenely loud in the quiet of my hallway. Inside, gold foil gleamed, embossed with two names that struck me with the force of a physical blow: Calla Morrow and Julian Sterling. My sister and Julian Sterling. The air left my lungs. Julian Sterling. The name was a key that turned a lock I had sealed shut in the deepest dungeon of my memory. I was 24, standing in a sterile boardroom, pouring my soul into a pitch for Aquavita, a low-cost, portable water purification system I had designed for communities with contaminated water. He was one of the investors, a man with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and a reputation for dismantling dreams with elegant cruelty. He'd let me finish my entire presentation, let me hang my future on every chart and graph, before he leaned back and delivered his verdict. "A commendably sentimental endeavor, Ms. Morrow," he'd said, his voice slick and condescending. "But sentiment doesn't generate returns. Your business model is a house of cards built on wishful thinking. You'd be better off channeling this passion into a more suitable hobby." The polite, dismissive laughter from the other suits in the room had felt like 1,000 tiny cuts. I had left that room with the shattered pieces of my ambition clutched in my hands. And now, he was marrying my sister. The juxtaposition was too perfect, too cruel to be chance. This was a deliberate coronation. Calla, the golden child, was marrying the man who had embodied my most profound professional humiliation. It was a message, written in calligraphy and gold leaf. Look at the kingdom we have built without you. Look at the man we have welcomed, and remember the girl we cast out. But the invitation itself was the true masterpiece of their cruelty. The Grand Ethelwood Hotel. It was more than a venue, it was a statement. It was where old money married new ambition, where society pages were born, and where people like me, the erased, the disowned, did not belong. So why? After 12 years of absolute, unwavering silence, why was I being summoned? Was it a test? A trap? Or perhaps a final, twisted act of victory to have me witness their perfection from the shadows? My mind, against my will, was dragged back to the origin of my exile. I was 17. The heart of the storm was my mother's emerald necklace, a family heirloom that had belonged to my grandmother. It vanished from her jewelry box. The house descended into a panicked search. I had been the last one in her room, but only to return a novel I'd borrowed. I was innocent, but innocence is a fragile shield against a predetermined verdict. My sister Calla was the star witness. She appeared, a vision of distressed virtue, her eyes glistening with manufactured tears. I don't want to say anything, but I saw Kate near Mom's jewelry box this afternoon," she'd whispered, her voice trembling with a convincing fragility. "She looked furtive." The word was a poison dart. My father, a man who valued appearances above all else, looked at me as if I were a stain on his pristine world. "I see the greed in you, Kate," he'd said, his voice low and full of disgust. "It's always been there." But it was my mother, Vivian, who wielded the scalpel. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She looked at me with a cold, surgical disappointment that was far more devastating than any rage. "A family is built on trust," she stated, her voice flat and final. "We do not harbor thieves. The truth always reveals itself." The necklace was never found. My place in the family was, I became a non-person. Meals were eaten without a place set for me. My high school graduation came and went without acknowledgement. I lived as a specter in my own home, until the day I turned 18 and walked out with a single duffel bag and a heart that had been pulverized into dust. I thought that was the depth of their betrayal. I was naively wrong. The true abyssal fall came a year after I had left. Lonely and desperate for any thread to my past, I contacted a cousin. The conversation was strained, awkward. "Kate, listen, it's better to just let it go. After what your mother discovered, it all makes a terrible kind of sense." "Discovered what?" I asked, a cold dread seeping into my veins. A long, pained sigh. "The DNA test, Kate. Vivian had it done privately. It came back inconclusive for a maternal match. She said it explained everything. Why you were so different from her and Calla. Why you never truly fit." The world dropped out from under me. A DNA test? Inconclusive? It was a lie, a monstrous, calculated lie. But it was a lie that provided them with a clean, clinical, and irrefutable excuse. I wasn't just a problematic daughter. I was potentially not even her daughter. The emotional disownment was now backed by pseudoscientific justification. They had retroactively invalidated my very bloodline. For years, I drowned in the corrosive injustice of it. I built a new life, piece by painful piece. I became a successful freelance graphic designer, finding solace in the order and control of pixels and vectors. I found a gentle, steady love with a man named Ben, to whom I only ever revealed the tip of this iceberg of pain. But the core of me, the 17-year-old Kate, remained trapped in that house of lies, screaming into a void that refused to hear her. Holding that wedding invitation, I felt a fundamental shift. The frozen core of my grief began to thaw, not into warmth, but into a cold, sharp, and brilliantly focused fury. This invitation was not an olive branch. It was a gauntlet thrown. They wanted to see if the ghost was still docile. They wanted to parade my isolation in front of their glittering friends, to let me serve as a living reminder of what happens to those who defy the Morrow family order. They expected me to be cowed, to be ashamed, to stay in the shadows where they had banished me. I walked into my home office, a space I had built from nothing, and opened the small, fireproof safe bolted to the floor. Behind my passport and birth certificate lay a single, slim, unmarked manila folder. My anchor folder. Inside, I kept the one piece of tangible evidence I had never understood how to use. A faded, thermal-printed receipt from a place called GeneQuest Diagnostics, dated a mere 3 weeks before the inconclusive DNA test was conveniently revealed. The service listed was a comprehensive maternal lineage analysis. The payment method was cash. The client name was Vivian Morrow. I had found it years ago, tucked inside an old textbook while clearing out my childhood room, and kept it out of a gut-deep, unresolved instinct that it mattered. Now, for the first time, I saw it not as a tragic souvenir, but as the first stone for my sling. It was proof of premeditation. It was a thread, and I was finally ready to pull. I picked up my phone and called Ben. "Hey," I said, my voice disturbingly calm. "I'm going to my sister's wedding." He was silent for a beat, and I could picture the concern etched on his face. "Kate, my love, are you absolutely sure? After all this time, why put yourself through that?" "I'm sure," I said, my gaze fixed on the embossed names, my voice dropping to a whisper. "It's time for the ghost to learn how to haunt." I ended the call and stared at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant ache that would probably never fully leave. But it was now encased in something stronger, something unyielding, a cold, diamond-hard resolve. They had forged a test to prove I wasn't family. I was going to crash their wedding and prove, once and for all, that I was the only one who understood the meaning of loyalty, truth, and the fierce, unbreakable bond of real family. The days following the invitation's arrival were a study in controlled chaos. The initial, white-hot fury had cooled into something more durable and far more dangerous, a meticulous, cold-blooded resolve. I was no longer just a wounded woman reacting to a slight. I was a general preparing for a war they had declared 12 years ago. The wedding invitation was not just a piece of paper. It was my battlefield map, and I intended to know every inch of the terrain before I set foot on it. My first move was research. The Grand Ethelwood Hotel's website became my obsession. I studied the layout of the ballroom, the entrance and exit routes, the schedule for a typical wedding weekend. I needed to know where the power centers were, where the speeches would be made, where the family would be seated, where the photographer would be stationed to capture every flinch, every crack in their perfect facade. I wasn't just going to attend, I was going to perform a public dissection. But information was only one weapon. I needed armor. I spent a small fortune I had meticulously saved on a single devastating piece of couture. It was a gown of deep sapphire velvet, sleeveless and backless, cut with architectural precision. It wasn't a dress that begged for attention, it commanded it. It was the sartorial equivalent of a declaration of war. When I tried it on, standing in the soft light of the boutique, I didn't see the ghost they had tried to create. I saw a queen ready to reclaim her throne. Ben watched my transformation with a mixture of awe and anxiety. One evening, he found me at our dining table, which was no longer a place for meals but a war room. The centerpiece was a large legal pad, covered in a web of notes, arrows, and question marks. "Kate," he said softly, leaning against the doorframe. "This is a lot. Are you sure this is healthy, dredging all this up?" I looked up from my notes, my eyes meeting his. "They didn't just dredge it up, Ben. They built a palace on top of it and sent me an invitation to the housewarming. This isn't about dwelling in the past. It's about excavating the truth they buried me under. Healthy or not, it's necessary." I showed him the Gene Quest receipt. "This is my starting point. This proves she went looking for a specific answer, but it's not enough. I need to prove the result was fabricated." With Ben's reluctant but steadfast help, my investigation began in earnest. The anchor folder grew fat. My first breakthrough came from a deep dive into corporate records. GeneQuest Diagnostics, I discovered, had its license revoked and was shut down 2 years after my mother's visit, following a state investigation into falsified results and bribery. The doctor whose name was on their letterhead had his medical license permanently revoked. This wasn't a reputable lab, it was a forger's workshop. I printed every article, every legal filing, and added them to the growing dossier. The lie was becoming tangible. But the DNA test was the foundational sin. The everyday betrayals were the bricks and mortar of my exile. I needed to remind myself of all of it, to armor myself against the doubt they would surely try to plant. I forced myself to open the digital vault of memories I kept locked away. I found the old, anonymous campus blog post that had circulated during my final year of college. The real Kate Morrow, the girl who cried victim. Rereading it now, with the clarity of distance, I could see my sister's literary fingerprints all over it. The specific, petty anecdotes, the turn of phrase that was uniquely hers masquerading as concerned gossip. It had cost me a crucial internship, turning my professor's looks of encouragement into those of pity and suspicion. Then I unearthed the true crown jewel of Calla's theft. Buried in an old email archive was the draft of my senior thesis on sustainable urban design. A week after I'd excitedly shown it to her, the file corrupted mysteriously. I'd had to submit a rushed, inferior version. I'd written it off as a technological fluke, a personal failure. But now, with a few clicks on a professional research database, I found it. A paper published in a minor but respected journal a year later, under the name Calla Morrow. The title was different, the introduction reworded, but the core thesis, the innovative data models, the conclusions, they were mine, word for stolen word. She had not just taken my ideas, she had taken my voice and used it to sing her own song of success. The most painful excavation, however, was personal. I reached out to the one person from my old life I thought might still be an ally. Sarah, my childhood best friend. Our friendship had been a casualty of the war, another connection my mother had neatly severed. I sent a careful, tentative email. Her reply was swift and heartfelt. "Kate, I've thought about you so often. What they did, it was never right. I never believed it." We met at a quiet park, the silence between us initially heavy with the weight of years. But soon the old familiarity returned. "Your mother," Sarah said, stirring her coffee, her voice low. "She worked so hard to control the narrative. After you left, she told everyone you chosen a reckless path, that you cut them off. She said it was a private heartbreak, too painful to discuss." Then she offered me a piece of the puzzle I never knew existed. Do you remember that summer you worked as a lifeguard? You were maybe 16. You came home with a small, weird burn on your arm from a faulty electrical socket at the pool. I nodded, the memory vague. A few weeks later, Sarah continued, her eyes earnest, I overheard your mother on the phone with someone. She was talking about you. She said, and I'll never forget this because it was so cold, the girl is clearly self-harming. It's a cry for attention, but we're handling it privately. She was already building the case, Kate, long before the necklace. She was painting you as unstable, unreliable. The revelation was an ice-cold dagger. The forgery wasn't an isolated event. It was the culmination of a years-long, covert campaign to dismantle my credibility, to make my eventual erasure seem like an inevitable, tragic necessity. Armed with this new, horrifying context, I turned my focus to the final and most dangerous part of my plan, Julian Sterling. My humiliation in his boardroom was a personal wound, but I needed to know if it was part of a larger pattern. What was a man like him doing marrying into the Morrow family? Was it just a merger of wealth and status, or was there more? Ben, with his quiet proficiency in the digital realms I rarely traversed, helped me dig. We found nothing obvious at first. His record was, as expected, impeccably clean. Too clean. But then, buried in the comments section of an old financial forum, we found a ghost. A deleted user responding to a post about Sterling's first venture fund had written, "Ask him about the Ocean View Partners deal. The due diligence that never was. The investors are still waiting." The comment was from 8 years ago, a digital whisper. It was a thread, frayed and thin, but it was a thread. We followed it. Ocean View Partners was a real estate investment that had collapsed, losing a small group of investors millions. Julian had been the fund manager. The official story was market volatility. The whispers, which we painstakingly pieced together from archived forum posts and redacted legal documents, suggested something else, that Julian had fast-tracked the investment based on a personal relationship with the developer, bypassing standard safeguards. It was never proven. There was no lawsuit, but the stench of impropriety lingered. I printed everything. The blog post, the plagiarized paper, the articles on Gene Quest, the notes from my conversation with Sarah, and the fragmented, circumstantial evidence on Julian. I laid them out on the dining table, a mosaic of my family's deceit. This was no longer just about a forged DNA test. It was about a systemic, multi-generational commitment to a beautiful lie. The night before the wedding, I stood before my bedroom mirror, the sapphire gown hanging nearby. I held up the final piece of my arsenal, a simple, elegant clutch purse. It was large enough to hold my phone, my lipstick, and a single, folded sheet of paper. On that paper, I had condensed the entire sprawling saga into 3 bullet points. 1. The DNA test, forged by Vivian at a discredited lab to justify disinheritance. 2. The pattern of theft, Calla's history of stealing my work, from a college thesis to my professional reputation. 3. The groom's integrity, questions about Julian Sterling's fiduciary past with the Ocean View Partners collapse. I didn't need to bring the whole dossier. I just needed the key to unlock the vault. This single page was that key. Ben came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. Our reflections stared back, a united front. "You're ready," he whispered. I leaned back into his solid warmth, drawing strength from it. "I am," I said, my voice steady. "They think they're inviting a ghost to haunt their halls. They have no idea I'm the one who's about to bring the whole house down." The Grand Ethelwood Hotel did not simply occupy a space in the city. It devoured the very light around it, a colossal monument of gilded ambition and old money. Its facade, all shimmering black glass and polished brass, reflected a world that had systematically spat me out. As my car pulled up to the curb, a valet in immaculate white gloves approached, his smile a practiced, vacant curve. I felt a familiar, cold tremor deep in my bones, the ghost of the 17-year-old girl who had been told she was not enough. But then I felt the heavy, reassuring weight of the folded paper in my clutch, and the tremor stilled. I was not that girl anymore. I was the storm they had foolishly dared to summon. Stepping into the lobby was like walking into a diamond. Chandeliers the size of small cars dripped from the ceiling, scattering light across marble floors so pristine they seemed liquid. The air itself smelled of expensive perfume, rare orchids, and the quiet, ruthless hum of power. I could feel the glances, curious, assessing, then flickering with recognition and shock. Whispers trailed in my wake like a bridal train. Is that? It can't be. Kate Morrow. I did not look at them. My gaze was fixed ahead, my posture a straight, unyielding line in the sapphire velvet. I found the entrance to the celestial ballroom, its double doors thrown open to reveal a scene of breathtaking artifice. Hundreds of people swirled in a kaleidoscope of silk and tuxedos, and there, at the center of it all, was the royal court. My mother, Vivian, was a vision in silver, holding court with a brittle, radiant smile. My father stood beside her, a handsome, empty suit of armor. And Calla was incandescent. Draped in what must have been $250,000 worth of lace and satin, she laughed, a sound like chiming bells, her hand possessively on the arm of Julian Sterling, who looked every inch the conquering king. I paused at the threshold, allowing the scene to solidify. I let them see me. I let the silence ripple out from my presence, a stone dropped into their perfect, stagnant pond. Vivian saw me first. Her smile didn't so much fall as it was chemically neutralized. The warmth in her eyes evaporated, replaced by a flash of pure, undiluted panic before it was buried under a glacier of control. My father's jaw tightened. Calla's brilliant laugh cut off mid-chime, her face draining of color so quickly I thought she might faint. Julian's smug composure cracked. He looked at me not with recognition, but with the wary calculation of a man, seeing a variable he had failed to account for. It was my mother who broke the standoff. She glided towards me, her movements fluid and dangerous, a shark in a silver sheath dress. "Kate," she said, her voice a low, venomous whisper meant only for me. The word felt like a slap. "What are you doing here? This is not the time nor the place for one of your scenes." I offered her a small, cold smile. "I RSVP'd, Mother. Didn't you get my response? I wouldn't have missed my only sister's wedding for the world." Her eyes narrowed. "Leave now, you are not welcome here." "On the contrary," I said, my voice calm but carrying. "The invitation had my name on it. It's so touching that you finally remembered what it was." I stepped past her, my shoulder brushing hers, a subtle, deliberate act of defiance. I felt the eyes of the entire room upon me. I moved through the crowd, a dark blue current parting a sea of pastels and black ties. I accepted a flute of champagne from a stunned waiter and found an empty space near the back, a silent, unignorable specter at their feast. The evening progressed with a strained, frantic gaiety. The toasts began. A succession of Calla's impeccably curated friends took the microphone, gushing about her beauty, her brilliance, her kindness. Each word felt like a layer of lacquer over a rotten frame. Finally, the best man, one of Julian's slick colleagues, raised his glass. "To Calla and Julian, a perfect union of two perfect people, destined for a perfect future." The applause was eager, relieved. As it died down, I saw my moment. I did not rush. I walked with a slow, deliberate grace to the podium. The room fell into a dead, bewildered hush. The band faltered and stopped. "I'd like to say a few words," I announced, my voice clear and steady as I took the microphone. "To my dear sister, Calla." The look on her face was one of pure, unvarnished terror. "We've shared so much throughout our lives," I began, my tone sweet, laced with a poison only our family would recognize. "Haven't we, Calla? You were always so inspired by my work. I still look back so fondly on my senior thesis on sustainable urban design. The data models were so innovative, don't you think? It's a shame the original file was lost. But then," I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the confused audience, "it seemed to find new life a year later, published under your name." A remarkable coincidence. A wave of murmurs swept the room. Calla looked like a trapped animal. "Kate, that's a lie," she shrilled, her voice cracking. "Is it?" I asked mildly. I didn't need to present the proof here. I only needed to plant the seed. I then turned my gaze to Julian. "And Julian, it's so good to see you again. The last time we met, you were telling me my business model was a fantasy. I took your advice to heart. I suppose you prefer business models with less scrutiny. like the Ocean View Partners Fund, for instance. I'm sure those investors who lost everything would be fascinated to know what your real due diligence process was. Julian's face was a thundercloud. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't I asked softly. The room was now utterly captivated, an audience watching an execution. Then I turned my final and most devastating gaze upon my mother. She was standing rigid, her knuckles white as she gripped her champagne flute. And you, Mother, you went to such extraordinary lengths to make sure I knew I didn't belong. The private investigators, the whispers, the campaign to make me seem unstable. I paused, the silence so absolute you could hear the ice melting in the glasses. And then, of course, the piece de resistance, the DNA test from GeneQuest Diagnostics. Vivian's composure finally shattered. How dare you, she hissed. A lab that was shut down for fraud, I continued, my voice rising, ringing with the truth I had carried for 12 years. A doctor who lost his license for falsifying results. You didn't just disown me, Mother. You fabricated scientific evidence to do it. You paid for a lie to make my exile official, to cut me out of grandfather's will, to make sure I had nothing. The gasps in the room were no longer subtle. They were sharp, scandalized explosions. She's insane, Vivian cried out, appealing to the crowd, but her authority had evaporated. The mask had slipped, and they all saw the monstrous calculation beneath. It was then that Julian spoke, his voice low and furious, but not at me. He was staring at Calla. Is it true? He demanded. The plagiarism, the lies. Calla could only stare, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. And you, he said, turning on Vivian, his voice dripping with a newfound, disgusted understanding. You brought this toxicity into my life. You sold me a perfect package, but it's all a fraud. With a look of utter contempt, he turned and walked away, straight out of the ballroom. The symbolic king had abandoned his throne. The perfect tableau shattered. Calla burst into hysterical, messy tears, her makeup streaking down her face. My father stood motionless, a statue of shame and impotence. And Vivian just stared at me, her face a hollowed-out mask of hatred and defeat. The society vultures were already circling, phones out, whispering furiously. I didn't stay for the aftermath. I had said what I came to say. I placed the microphone back on the podium and walked out of the ballroom, the sound of their crumbling world a symphony at my back. The silence that followed me this time was not one of exclusion, but of awe. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. I breathed it in, feeling it purge the last of the poisoned air I had been breathing for 12 years. I felt light, unshackled. A text buzzed in my clutch. It was from a blocked number, but I knew. It was my mother, just 3 words, you have destroyed us. I typed back a single, final response. No, you did that all by yourselves. Then I blocked the number, got into my car, and drove away from the gilded cage, finally, truly, free. The ghost had not come to haunt them. She had come to bury them. And in doing so, she had finally set herself free.